Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Easter week.
Happy Easter.
It feels like, last week felt like, as a parent, it felt like, normal weeks, kids out of the house. We're slowly easing back to normal. And now it just feels like a step back to lockdown with more sun.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the first lockdown. The first lockdown was full of sun. So now we've gone back. We've gone back to that.
I can't believe it. It's a year now.
I know.
It's a year. My gosh. Hello, good morning, everyone. How are you feeling this morning? Can you believe it's been a year of this? oh my God. I'm just anyway. We'd love to hear how everyone is feeling this morning. So a quick score, I was suggesting. 10 being amazing, 1 being the opposite, and 7s aren't allowed because that's just a mess score.
Exactly. Easy, too easy.
Was it in net promoter scores, isn't it? And basically anything below a 9 is just rubbish.
So we can ask you to score, but if you're scoring below 9, that's rubbish. And then you're not welcome here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're below 9, you're rubbish. Nice and simple. Easy metrics. So today, we kind of called this breaking through your money ceiling. And I interpreted it in a particular way. And as with all things written down without discussion, you had another interpretation, which I was very curious about. And so maybe we could sort of like go from that story of where this idea of the ceiling came from and what that ceiling was.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, yeah. The thing now, obviously the idea of ceiling is not something that I or many people can lay claim to. We're all quite familiar with ceilings, but where ceiling came from in this context was actually from a couple of different things. When we were sort of talking about this, what we might talk about, like end of last week, early this week, I was thinking about some work that I was doing with a client, and I can sort of talk about that in a minute. But there's a little bit in there about the kind of levels that they were kind of negotiating at and why they were kind of negotiating at that. But I was kind of reminded of some work that another coach of mine had kind of shared. It was when I was running my last business. We went on a coaching program. It was called Strategic Coach. Kind of runs over several years. There's lots of really kind of useful, good insights in it. Anyway, the guy who set that up is a guy called Dan Sullivan, and he talks about this idea of a ceiling of complexity when you're running your business. So when you set your business up, you kind of head off on a road and you're doing the things that you do, and you do more of those things, but you're just kind of adding things in essentially and doing the things that you've always done. And slowly but surely, your kind of business gets ever more complicated, ever more complex, and you kind of reach this kind of point where the complexity constrains you. The complexity kind of limits the kind of next evolution a little bit. And so obviously what they're trying to get you to do is sort of just break apart all of the elements that have kind of come together to form the kind of mess, the sort of stuff of your work. So you can work out, what you can delegate, what you can stop doing, what you can give to others, and so on. So you kind of create some room, some space, so that you kind of move through that ceiling of complexity. And that kind of image, I always kind of felt was a very evocative image. And when I was thinking about the work that I was doing, helping the client of mine, I kind of felt lots of sort of similarities with that, but just specifically from the point of view of kind of money and pricing and what you charge and how money comes into your business. Because they were in a kind of place actually about 6 months ago, because I've been working with them for just over 6 months now. When I started working with them, they were in a kind of point where things were feeling very kind of fraught. Things were feeling very, very tight. Work was very hard to come by. Admittedly, also it was 6 months ago. So we were kind of, slap bang in the halfway through the first year of kind of lockdown and all the kind of crazy chaos that came with that. But yeah, so kind of lots of sort of anxiety, lots of worry, lots of just kind of bouncing along, quite desperate, looking for work, trying to get things done. And they were getting ever kind of fixated on this kind of amount that they needed to be charging in order to win work. And that amount was very, very low, actually. And the actual amount is kind of not really so relevant because it's different for everybody. But for what they were doing, it was very, very low. They were trying to sell these pieces of work for sort of just over £2,000 essentially, and they for what they were doing, like I said, it was very, very low. And what we kind of started to kind of work on, amongst other things, over the sort of 6 months, was trying to kind of put that story aside, that this was the amount that they needed to charge, and just spend time to get confidence by spending time really just looking at, well, what is it that the client is buying? And why are they buying it? Okay, so, a client, so we're looking at this client is selling these programs. These programs are worth £200,000-300,000 a go for the client. And why are they asking you to work on it? They're asking you to work on it because you're going to do X, Y, Z. Therefore, if your work goes even a little bit well, you can be very confident that you are helping them find an extra £200,000. And we were just starting to kind of help them in their minds link their own story back up to what the client was actually getting. So help them stop kind of muddying yourself with everything that you're worried about as much as that possible, and start looking at what it is that your clients are buying and why they're buying it. So this idea of kind of pricing outside in, and it kind of creates this space. It lifts the ceiling a little bit, this kind of ceiling of story that you are kind of putting on yourself, and helps you kind of sort of just look afresh, look with a new perspective of everything that you're doing via the lens of what the client is buying. And so what that does, it kind of, like I said, it creates a space, it lifts this ceiling, so that the price that they started to kind of look at and play with, all of a sudden is 5 times, well, not all of a sudden, but over the 6 months is 5 times what they had been charging before. And so I kind of pointed it out to my client just to kind of remind them of that kind of journey that they'd been on when we were talking a few weeks ago. Just to say, look at this. You go from this place of this kind of worry, this kind of fear, this kind of desperation, got to get it, this idea that you have about what it's worth and what a client should pay, which of course is just you in your cocoon, stuck in your sort of your own kind of mental, emotional echo chamber. And by getting some space and starting to just kind of remind yourself, looking from the outside in, seeing what your client is kind of getting, creates this kind of space and opportunity for you to see the value of your work in a new way. And, they find that actually the negotiation is not harder or easier or any kind of less likely or more likely to kind of win by having put their prices up by 5 times. Actually, they're winning the same amount of things. They're just charging 5 times the amount that they were. And that can keep going, the more you kind of keep looking at that. So that was kind of a bit of a long and rambling route into where the ceiling came from, so to speak.
I know. I understand that better now. And I think there's, whether it's like a picture of a physical ceiling that you bump up against, or another way for me when you're talking and thinking about it is kind of drag. If you're like weighed down by the complex sales processes, complex value proposition, uncertainty about who your customer really is and what they want, that kind of stops you from moving upwards, growth, whatever that means, personal growth, business growth. And we talk about it a lot in our communities, like how do you simplify? How do you get to really to the core of what it is you're doing and you're offering? It also it reminded me of a couple of the things from the 3 toxic myths around money that we talked about last week. I think it was last week. So one of them was the kind of there's not enough. And so that feeling of like, oh my God, scarcity, desperation, I need to scrabble for whatever I can get. And then the third one, which is, and that's the way it is. And for me, that comes across, when you're talking about, all right, we need to sell this for £2,000. That is the benchmark in our head. And I remember when we were doing like websites, we had this thing about £1,500. That's the thing we wanted to sell. So what we would do is sometimes we would try and sell something for £3,000 that would be worth £3,000 and then discount it for £1,500. So it was this thing that the anchor or the thing that was stopping us from moving was the figure, rather than what you're saying there. So actually, what is this customer actually going to get? by working with us? What are they trying to get to? And the final thing that sprang to mind that I think is kind of releasing is the thinking of ourselves not as costs, but investments. Because if I, as a, cause sometimes I think clients, even us as customers, is like we think of stuff as costs, but once we reframe that as actually, God, I want to get 200 grand's worth of sales. To get there, I need to spend 50 grand, for instance. So I'm accepting, all right, in order to do that, I might spend 50 grand, but I get 150 grand back. I reframe that 50 grand less as, oh, it's money going away, as more as an enabler for money to come in. And that, for me, I think starts to free up some of that fear and anxiety about, well, as someone who's selling a service that's creating an impact that I know, and I know what that impact is, rather than I'm just selling a thing. I think it feels more free or more powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is. I think that that idea. Well, clearly, the language that we use is really important generally, isn't it? So, and as we try and kind of make that shift and thinking about these things kind of as investments, it kind of points us in the right direction. But of course, there can still be kind of worry and anxiety. We've all had it drilled into us. Investments can go up, down as well as up, or whatever way they kind of do it. So there's kind of always a sort of feeling there. But the other thing which I was kind of reminded of as you were talking, which I think was partly a kind of thought route into the theme this week, was this kind of this thing around anchoring and framing. Because I was talking to a friend of mine about all of the biases that sort of come to play in this sort of thing, and also just in our kind of day-to-day lives, but we do talk about a fair bit on the course. And we were having the conversation around framing, and I think when on the course we talk about framing in the context of actually how you present it back to you, how you present your kind of proposals, your costs and whatever back to your client to kind of help them make choice around it. But the thought that I was having last week, which you sort of alluded to there, which of course is kind of framing happens all sorts of ways. So actually we are framing ourselves too. So like with my clients and like with yourself you were saying when you were selling websites, you had anchored yourselves to 1,500. And so irrespective of whatever the client wanted, actually you were exerting an anchor on yourself, which was a kind of drag, like you say. It was a kind of limiting down. And maybe in that way, kind of anchor actually is a sort of truer description, isn't it? Because it is kind of holding you down, it's fixing you down, rather than on the course we sort of talk about it the other way. And actually, one of the things that I got my client to do that I was talking about is actually exactly as you set it up, as you just explained it there. So I was saying to them, if you're clear, the client wins £200,000-300,000 from doing this work with you, then you should be starting that conversation at £50,000. And that's not to say that they're going to pay you £50,000. The chance of that is very, very low. But that should be where your conversation starts, so that when you are coming down to a point, so the journey comes down to more like £10,000 in that instance that they were going to be paying the client, rather than 1,500 or 2,000, which is what your own anchor would impose on you.
Yeah. And there's another point that I think we made in the email around who benefits and when. And so if I take that story of this guy, your client's client, who I think is like some kind of coaching program or something, they get a certain number of clients, and they over 3 programs they maybe get 200 grand. Okay, yes, they'll benefit once from that initial engagement with those clients over that program, but also they potentially benefit again because they built that relationship with those clients, who can then buy other products or services, who create connection, who then go and sell, or basically through word of mouth, maybe find other people. So when you start looking at that in terms of all the other added value or the opportunity you create by being part of this, by sharing, doing your work and being part of their journey, then it seems a bit kind of like selling yourself cheap. If you don't think about that stuff. And that for me is part of the whole thing that you talk about on the course, is like, find out more about what your client is trying to do and where they're trying to get to. Yeah, no, those conversations I feel like we don't have enough of with our clients, and we don't, even with our existing clients, not only potential clients, really understanding their world, not only just the immediate, what am I going to get from you and how am I going to get to the thing I want to get to, but what does that open up in terms of their world and in terms of their business. And that's where we become less just suppliers of a widget or a little small, finite service, but being more invested in where our customers are trying to get to and their businesses and the work they're doing.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you kind of mentioned there is a really important thing, and something kind of we ask a lot of the people on the course, or just kind of people who sort of work with this idea of, when you sell something, who benefits? And quite often when sort of we ask a group that, or I was working kind of one-to-one, people think it's a bit of a sort of trick question. And they're like, kind of think, I've got you, I know, of course my client benefits and I benefit. So, they think that the answer to the trick question is, of course, the obvious, that we both benefit. And of course, but that's only partly true, because really, like you're saying, the real beneficiary is actually the client or your customer, the person who buys your product or service, because they can enjoy the benefit of that over and over and over and over and over again. So, with the client that I was talking about, it's not just that their client benefits over because they can, they might have an ongoing relationship with the people who, with their new customers, but also they are learning. They're gaining expertise, they're gaining knowledge, they're gaining tools, they're gaining systems, they're gaining processes, they're gaining people, whatever it might be, that benefit their business over and over and over and over. So that might be true if you're selling marketing services. It might be true if you're selling, I don't know, sort of HR services, whatever it might be, that actually there's many, when we provide our service, when we provide our product, we benefit once. We benefit at the point of transaction, really. That's when the benefit comes to us as a business. But they benefit over and over and over and over and over again, like you're saying. And actually, it is important to remind ourselves of this, because that then opens up this idea that, hold on a second, what is the value of what I'm doing? And that's not to say that things get really complicated and it's like, well, how do I price? Because they kind of benefit over and over and over. But it's just a kind of moment to free yourself up and just remember, hold on a second, there is so much value in the work that I do. It's kind of an opportunity for me and important for them that I take some time to explore this, so that we can all understand actually what it is. And in there, that's where you start to get the opportunity of kind of pricing well, pricing happier.
As always, we'd love to hear any questions that you may have around this. Either the ideas we're talking about this morning, about this kind of money ceiling, or kind of understanding value, what the value you're trying to create by understanding more about your customers, or any other general pricing questions that you may have. We love to. It's always nice to have a question to kind of ground the conversation in, rather than getting too much, I think, bogged down in sort of concepts and abstract ideas. But on that, in terms of abstract ideas, because the other thought I had around this idea of ceiling, and I did a quick poll just to ask if anyone thought that they hit a money ceiling, and so far everyone said no. 2 people said
they're all
no.
outside. They're all in the garden. No ceilings there. They're in a money garden.
And maybe I kind of, the way I framed that question, no one's going to say yes, I've hit a money ceiling. It's going to admit that they're not going to be able to make more money. But I think the way I would frame that is if you thought really deeply about how much you are happy to charge and how much money you are comfortable to make.
Yeah. And the other thing is, how fixed, do you have a fixed idea about what it is you can sell your things for? Because that also there is a ceiling in there.
Well, and the first thing my assumption that most people will say is that there's a market rate. I can't go above the market rate. That's how much everyone charges, and so if I go above the market rate, I won't get the job. So that for me is always the surefire, quick answer for people. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts for people who are anchored by the market rate?
I would say you are anchored by an arbitrary thing, which doesn't exist anyway. I think, the idea that there is a market rate, even within whatever you kind of imagine that is, I bet without too much trouble, you could find people who were 20% over that market rate and 20% under that market rate. And with no trouble at all, with barely even leaving your chair, you could probably find people who were 10% over it and 10% under it. And with a little bit more exploration, you can find people who will be 100% over it, but not 100% under it. Well, yes, I guess they're providing it for free, those people. But yeah, so the market rate is an illusion that we tell ourselves to feel better.
And I think anyone who kind of focuses on the market rate, and I'm guilty of this, especially when we were running the agency, is that you're not really clear about who your customer is. And you're trying to sell to as many people as possible, to a broader range as possible. And I believe the more you're able to, and you talk about this on the course, the more you're able to know exactly who you want to work with, the more you can use your price as a way to position yourself for those customers.
Mm-hmm.
And so someone who, for instance, I can remember when Lawrence and I were running our agency, we would do a website for a charity that would be about £2,500, £3,000, and then a similar website with the same level of effort, maybe for Petra Eccleston, Bernie Eccleston's daughter.
Oh yeah,
that wasn't 3 times as much.
Mm.
But it was the perceived value of that work and what that meant for that person that dictated the price, rather than us saying, "Oh, this is," and then we've done this. This is our package. And we talk about making it easy to buy by having packages, but at the same time, I think if you take it too far and you get make that ceiling dragged down, held down, or anchored by specific packages, then I think that's where you can get unstuck and less free about charging or pricing well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's an interesting one, and I don't know if anyone's had that experience or whether they are fully enlightened when it comes to money and realize actually whether it's £1 or £100, it might be the same thing that you're doing. It's just who you're working with that's dictating the price.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on that, or anything that's springing to mind there, Ben?
I think the main thing which is in mind is, I guess still the kind of question that you have around this kind of the market rates thing, and the kind of expectation that there is an amount that you can charge. And whenever that was, there's always so many sort of examples which sort of come to mind, which just sort of expose that as sort of not true, really. Like coaching, for example. I remember sort of talking to someone. In fact, one of the first times when I was early on when in running my last business, where I was really just starting to kind of see and understand actually this whole thing around money and the stories that we had, and kind of somebody was talking about the Tony Robbins things, for example. And so effectively, there's a man selling coaching, but not for 2, 3, whatever, £50 an hour or whatever it might be, but for £20,000 a day. So it's like, what's kind of going on? What is happening there? It's it's coaching, but kind of sold for kind of hugely different amounts. I was talking to somebody who used to work for me, and he has a freelance career. He's a designer. He has a freelance career, and I knew what his kind of freelance rates were because we had also kind of employed him as a freelancer in my last business. So I knew what his kind of rates were, and I knew his rates had remained at that level for a very long time. And I was saying to him, kind of, Martin, what's going on? Why have your rates never changed? And he was like, no, because that's what, this is the top end of what the market will pay. And I did point out to him that there was somebody who he knew who had, who was kind of well known, relatively in that design world. He'd had a business, whatever, but he'd been to college with Martin, so they were peers in all that way. And he was charging 10 times a day what Martin was charging. And I was like, so what's different? What's different about who you are or your expertise or your experience or any of these things? Because actually there is no difference. They both went to college. They're both exceptional designers. They were at the Royal College of Arts, all of the credentials that come with that. 25 years of experience. Why is one person charging 10 times a day rate than the other? And so it was just kind of sort of pretty, so this thing, the story we have around the market rates is incredibly limiting. And the thing that Simon, the other person, is doing is he's using price as a signal. So, of course, there are not as many clients who can pay $5,000 a day, which is basically what he was charging for his services. But, the big companies who he is sort of signaling to, that for them is a it's a signal. It's an important signal. It says, I have expertise. I have, that I kind of value what I do very, very highly, that I can only work with certain people. And, there is plenty of work for him to do, as there is plenty of work for Martin to do. But, we just need to be careful around this market rates thing, because it can be a limiting, almost certainly is a limiting sort of factor, a drag on our ability to price well and price appropriately.
The word that springs to mind there is confidence.
And
I'm wondering whether there's a difference there in terms of, I was going to say confidence in your skills, but that might not be it. There's something around being bold, being confident. I feel also something around being clear about not only who you want to work with and the type of work you want to do. I'm also assuming what you want to do with the money.
Yeah.
There's a real, I don't know these people. I'm just making some assumptions, but I think when we are clear about, and there's another thing that you talk about in the course, when we are clear about what we will do with that money, not just for accumulating money for money's sake, particularly if you're someone who's a bit more purpose driven, not so much driven by the money.
Yeah.
But having that vision of actually, I'm not being greedy here. I'm actually going to use this money to do something, or greedy in the sense of just accumulating. That adds that clarity of where you want to get to, but also I feel there's something around how you build up the boldness and the confidence to do that seems to be a bit more foundational, belief driven. I don't know if that's something that you've experienced.
Yeah, and I think, and so we talk about this on the course of just getting clear at the beginning what more money will buy you, so that you do have some kind of orientation around this, and you are connected to a kind of reason for thinking about your money that is constructive and generative and valuable and all of these sorts of things, which is just about accumulating money for money's sake. And it's why we kind of do spend that kind of first session really talking about that, because I think I did some work with with a consultant who's written a lot around pricing, and we ran some courses together a while back. He'd actually written a book on pricing, which we had been a case study in, and I was kind of working with him afterwards, and I remember sort of talking to him about this point around kind of motivation. And he thought that, that people just wanted to make more profit was the motivation. But actually, money is a terrible kind of terrible kind of motivator, really, because it might, the pull of it might be quite strong, but very, very fleetingly. And, of course, it doesn't have any real kind of pull or value kind of beyond that. And so kind of for me, this kind of tapping into the things that you can do, the things that more money will buy you, is a really kind of important orientation. Like it can buy you more time, it can buy you more care, it can buy you and your family more opportunity, more chance to do things. It can buy you an opportunity to invest in the people who work with you. It can buy you the opportunity to invest in the people who support you. I mean, there's so many different kind of benefits that come from being clear around your money and kind of making it work to your advantage. And I think, it's kind of good that you sort of raise that point, because tapping into that motivation is the first step, is the primary step.
I think, maybe to finish off, that would be an invitation for any of you listening now, is maybe just to think about what would more money buy you, and just get really first start off very kind of free write it, just open and bold and not filtered, and then consider what does that really mean. Because when you're talking about, if it's money for money's sake, there's never an end. There's never enough not digits. There's a reason why there's a number. The infinity exists because numbers can go on forever. So if it's tied to amount of money in your bank, you'll never end. But then I think if you can tie it to things that are meaningful in your life, and I think that's, and with that, being quite selfish in inverted commas, but really looking about, well, what is it that enhance your life that you could do, whether they're experiences of personal growth or time with the family, as well as things that you can do for other people, and maybe even putting numbers on that. It starts to, at least give you something to work with when you're thinking of money, rather than purely profit for profit's sake and growth for the growth's sake.
Yeah, I guess the final thing I'd say on that, just picking up the thing you said there about kind of inviting people to be selfish for a minute, even just for a minute, just to. And I was kind of reminded of the organization that I have that provides meditation courses, and so they're all provided on Dana, on donation, on generosity is the kind of spirit that they are done, which is the kind of spirit of the tradition that is being taught. And I was listening to the Dana talk, which happens every day, that there is one of the teachings is provided, and the teacher was sort of talking about, obviously kind of Dana, generosity kind of being a two-way thing. So you might have means, you might have ability, you might have an opportunity where you can pay some money, but of course you might be in a situation where you can't be. And it's important in that time also to feel the generosity that comes from the fact that other people have been able to make a donation, which means the courses can be provided and so on. And I think, and that was I was just reminded of that as you were talking about the invitation to be selfish, because the invitation just to go, well, actually, what might more money buy me? That isn't just, zeros in a bank account, but all of the many other kind of benefits and sort of opportunities that comes with that. And it is important to be selfish a bit every now and then.
Selfish and intentional and clear, and I think this is part of the foundations of what you're teaching on the course, is rather than unconsciously working with pricing and unconsciously working with money, how can we do this in a way that we realize what we're doing, and we can actually make some impact, feel confident, feel happy, because that's what it's about, isn't it?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, everyone else who listened along. If you have any questions that you'd like us to tackle, actually, on future shows, then I'm going to put my email address into the chat. Please ping myself or Ben an email. Actually, yours is. Do you want to type your address in so I don't?
I will. And also, if you're interested in the course, press that big green button.
Press the big green button if you want to find out more about how the happy pricing course works, because it's something that allows us to work with people a bit more deeply and get them to do the work together as a group, because that's one of the things that we believe in a lot, is that transformation really helps when you're doing it with other people and you can see that you're helping each other along the journey. Brilliant. Well, have a great rest of the day. Enjoy some freedom today, Ben, without kids. Yes, excellent. Lots of blog post writing or Netflix watching.
Yes.
Cool. Take care. See you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.